I want to tell you the story of the Buddha and the Angry Brahmin. And a Brahmin, for those of you who may be unfamiliar, is basically a kind of priest. So one day, this Brahmin went to see the Buddha, and he was very angry. Probably he was envious that so many people had been going to see the Buddha rather than coming to him. And as soon as he arrived, he began berating the Buddha, hurling all kinds of insults and accusations at him. Perhaps saying things like, "Look at you. You think you're some kind of holy person? You think you're better than everyone? You think you know everything? You don't know anything. You're a nobody. You're a fool and a fraud." And the Buddha just sat calmly and quietly, simply listening, not reacting, seeming completely unaffected, which only infuriated the Brahmin all the more. And so after some time, the Brahmin said, "Don't you have anything to say? I've just stood here insulting you, and you just sit there with that stupid look on your face. Why aren't you getting angry?" The Buddha looked at him with compassion and said, "It's very simple. You see, I am rubber and you are glue, and everything you say bounces off of me and sticks to you." Now, of course, that's not really what he said, but what he did say was actually quite similar. He asked the Brahmin a question. He said, if someone offers food to a guest and the guest declines to take it, what happens to it? The Brahmin replied, "It would remain with the one who offered it." "So, in the same way," said the Buddha, "you have offered me your anger and agitation, and I have declined to take it, and so it remains with you. Therefore, you alone suffer." When someone insults us, it's coming from their own agitation, which they are attempting to transfer over to us. But we don't have to receive it. Like the Buddha, we can decline the offer, thereby remaining unaffected. But of course, this is a lot easier said than done. It takes a bit of insight and practice not to react to this sort of thing. It isn't something that we simply will. It isn't that we suppress the reaction. What is needed is to understand it. And in order to understand it, you have to observe and examine it. And you can't do that if you deny it or resist it or repress it. You have to allow space for the emotion to arise so that it can be looked at. And this doesn't mean that we impulsively react by offering an insult in return. The Buddha compared this to sharing a meal. That person has essentially extended an invitation for you to partake in a meal with them. And if you accept the invitation, which is to say, if you return the insult, then it's as if you're both consuming that meal together. And the food which you're consuming is anger and agitation, which is like eating spoiled food. The more that you consume, the more that you suffer. So even though we may initially feel angry, and we may feel the impulse to return the insult, we can simply take notice of that impulse, and rather than act upon it, we can make space between the feeling and the response by breathing slowly and deeply, and allowing a moment for the anger to settle. And the more that it settles, the more clarity we have in that moment. And we begin to see whether or not it's even worth responding. Oftentimes, we may find that a response is not necessary at all. Or we may observe that when we do respond in the same manner, it only makes the situation worse. Or in some cases, we may choose to respond, but to do so in a way that is calm and productive. But when someone insults you, it's not their words which are the cause of your upset. All they're doing is making sounds with their mouth, and those sounds have no power in and of themselves to affect how you feel. These sounds have no meaning or significance apart from what the mind ascribes to them. If you pay close attention to the emotional reaction, you'll find that there is some thought giving rise to it. And that thought may be at the forefront of your mind, or somewhere in the back of your mind, or even deep in the subconscious. So you may have to really look very deep in order to recognize it. But somewhere there is a thought which gives rise to this emotional reaction. Suppose someone calls you a loser. This is a very common insult that people like to use. And I always thought it was strange. When someone would call me a loser, I would think to myself, what exactly did I lose? After all, you have to be competing in order to lose. And as far as I was aware, I wasn't competing with anyone. But people who use this insult see themselves as being in competition with others, even if no one is actually competing with them. They have this need to feel like a winner, only because deep down they feel like a loser. And they only feel like a loser because they're constantly comparing themselves to others to see how they measure up. And so it's really coming from a deep insecurity, a feeling of inadequacy, and the projection of that inadequacy onto others. Quite commonly, when someone insults another person, judges them, criticizes them, they're often projecting their own insecurities. Or it could be that they're just very unhappy. They may be feeling frustrated. They may be feeling anxious about something. They may be suffering some deep emotional wound. There could be any number of things giving rise to that behavior, which may have nothing at all to do with you. And so you don't have to take any of it personally. But let's suppose that someone calls you a loser, and you do take offense to it. You feel upset about it. Perhaps you feel angry, or maybe you just feel sad. But where is that feeling arising from? Are you willing to explore it and find out? It could be that it's touching upon your own insecurities, your own sense of inadequacy. Maybe you also have that underlying tendency to compare yourself with others, to see how you measure up, and to judge yourself accordingly. Maybe you already felt like a loser even before it was said, and so you take that person's words as confirmation of what you already believe about yourself. Or perhaps you have such a strong need for other people's approval and validation that whenever someone disapproves of you, even if it's someone that you don't particularly like, you still find yourself feeling disturbed by it. And again, this could be touching upon some deep underlying insecurity. And don't take any of what I'm suggesting as a matter of fact. To really understand this, you have to explore your own emotional reactions. So when the feeling arises, it's often best to just take a moment to be present with it, to allow space for it, to just allow the feeling to be felt, and to simply take notice of it. And this could be for any duration of time. But at some point, if we're observant, we'll begin to notice that there is some accompanying thought. Some thoughts may arise in response to the feeling, but if we pay close enough attention, we can also identify the thoughts giving rise to the feeling. And it may be some underlying belief, which is also a thought. A belief is really nothing more than a thought that we assume to be true. But it may not be true at all. It may be that we have simply never taken the time to question its validity, to challenge it, to consider the possibility that it may be mistaken. Whatever the case may be, if we can recognize what is at the root of our emotional reactivity, and if we can address it, if we can resolve it, then there's nothing to cause such a reaction. You may find yourself totally unaffected by someone's insults or criticisms. But as long as there is a reaction, we should be mindful not to deny it, not to repress it. We shouldn't try to imitate the Buddha, to try and force ourselves not to feel angry or upset. Rather, we need to be more alert and attentive to our emotional reactions, and to learn how to process our emotions in a healthy way. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking, I shouldn't be feeling this, I shouldn't be experiencing this feeling. Especially if you have some kind of intellectual understanding that the emotion is unnecessary, or that it's only creating unnecessary suffering. With that understanding, what we tend to do is judge ourselves for feeling, and then to repress and deny that emotion rather than taking the time to resolve it. But we should never deny what we're feeling. As long as the emotional reaction is there, we can simply approach it with compassion and curiosity. What is this reaction? Where is it arising from? What might be the underlying belief? And does that belief have any validity? Could it be due to some misunderstanding? Actually take the time to explore it and find out. One thing I've noticed in my own experience is that the more I come to accept myself, to love and respect and appreciate myself, the less I tend to take offense to insult. And so it really does seem that a great deal of it has to do with resolving personal insecurities. But this is just my own personal observation. Whether or not that applies to you, you have to find that out for yourself. So whenever someone insults you, judges you, criticizes you, if you can examine your reaction, see if you can find where it's arising from, so that you might begin resolving that in yourself. And then, once having done that, when someone offers you their anger and agitation, you can simply decline to take it.